Hi, this is me recounting my experience of chatting with my friend Aaron Rowick, who is a firefighter with one of our local fire halls here, Surrey Fire, in the lower mainland of British Columbia. Aaron has worked as a firefighter for 10 years. He began his firefighting career at YVR, the local airport here, the international airport. And after serving 5 years with the YVR fire crew, he applied and was hired to the Surrey Fire Department, which is a municipal fire department. So rather than seeing plane emergencies in terms of people landing with heart attack issues or health issues or distress or whatever it might be at the airport, he's moved into more conventional firefighting, as we would call it, in terms of being a first responder, attending car accidents, or of course structure fires from houses to commercial units or whatever else he and his fellow firefighters would be called to. So, without any further ado, I'll start the recollection of our conversation we had this morning. So I asked Aaron, first of all, I filled him in about this course, about this assignment, and asked him what were some of the hardest things he's seen as a firefighter. Of course, prefacing it with if he was not okay talking about it, or if he needed to stop at any time, of course he could, that the project is not more important than his own emotional well-being. But he was fine to talk about it, and was thankful for kind of the way out, so to speak, if he needed it. But I asked him, in light of this course on resiliency and continuing to serve and help people, what are some of the hardest things he's seen, and how did that impact him? How did that impact his family life? Him and I have been friends for many years, and our kids are growing up together. And so how does that impact him, his family life as a father, and just kind of gave him an open license to talk and recount stories. And really, he said there was one story that he told, which was an all-encompassing experience in terms of how it affected him, as well as his family, and even contemplating if the career was something that he ought to stick with. And I'll share that story with you now. So Aaron shared a story about his very first house fire. It started out as a regular call, and it was actually a new development in a brand new neighborhood. So the good news was the house that was on fire was uninhabited. It was completely empty. It had been sold, but the family that purchased it had not moved anything in and were themselves not living there. So in terms of the best case scenario of a structure, or specifically a house fire, this is what firefighters would hope to see if there was a fire. That nobody was inside, and people weren't losing their memories, their possessions. It was simply the structure itself that they wanted to contain the fire and make sure that it didn't spread to the surrounding houses. So him being a relatively new firefighter with the municipality, with Surrey, his chief sent my friend Aaron in. They figured it would be a great opportunity for him to run point on the call, to get some experience when the stakes were relatively low, although still a very dangerous situation. So Aaron went in, and he explained that the house was a 3-level house. So the main level coming in off the street, there was an upstairs, and there was a basement. and the fire they had pinpointed originated in the basement. So Aaron, leading the charge, went in, and two of his fellow firefighters walked in the front door, and one went to the left and one went to the right. The house was kind of it had a circle with a staircase in the middle going up and down. And Aaron proceeded to walk straight into the hallway because he could see that the fire was coming up through the stairwell. So he was going to walk to the hallway and run the hose down to attempt to put out the fire from the ground floor. As he walked in, he said the floor basically collapsed underneath him. And so he fell about 12 feet down into the basement, and to the best of his knowledge, wasn't knocked unconscious, but was definitely sore and kind of confused as to what had happened. He'd just fallen, and literally he said, the 1 minute I was standing thinking, okay, I need to put this fire out, and the next thing I know, I opened my eyes, my whole body hurt, and I was surrounded by fire. You could imagine how terrifying that would be, especially as a new firefighter. He said he could hear the shouts of his crew above him, calling down to him, making sure he was okay. As he said, as he kind of gathered himself and realized that he wasn't injured at all in a significant way, he was able to grab his hose and put out the fire. And by the time he had gotten the source of the fire out, the ladder was down and his crew was coming down to rescue him at this point. They were able to get him up the ladder, out of the house, and check him out on the scene. He was fine, obviously shaken up and sore, but he was fine. No burns, no broken bones or significant injuries, no concussion or head injuries from the fall, but definitely shaken up. Even as he recalled the story to me, he just remembered how he thought in the moments of falling and then kind of coming to again, he thought that this could be it. This could be the end of his life, which is a terrifying fear and reality for anyone to face. So I asked him, in light of that experience, what was the follow-up in terms of things he had to do based on his job, the requirements of being checked out at the scene and both afterwards to make sure there were no long-lasting injuries. And then what were some of the things he felt he needed to do or were told he should do in terms of the psychological impacts of having to, within the course of another week to 10 days, once he was cleared for duty again and feeling up to the task, going back on the shift, knowing that at any moment he would be called out to go and do the exact same thing again, run into a house that was on fire. I said, how did you work through being prepared to do that again when, as you said, you were sitting in a basement surrounded by fire, wondering if this is how and where your life would end? So what he shared next was about the work that he did in terms of seeing a counselor and kind of coming to grips with the risks inherent to the job, which he knew full well going into, but also what he would need to do in order to return to the job without hesitation, and to know that this was part of the risk of his profession, his line of work. So my friend Aaron is a Christian, and through his church, he actually was able to get access to a counselor in which he sat a number of times with, talking and praying through some of the trauma that he experienced, not only physical, obviously, but just the emotional and spiritual trauma of realizing not only would potentially facing his own mortality, but the fact that he has a wife and 2 children, and leaving them behind. How do you come to grips with this reality? And what are some things you can do going back to work, to not always be second guessing yourself or to be fearful of doing your job because other people's lives are at stake. If he makes a second guess based on his own unprocessed trauma and fear. So some of the things they spoke about were just being able to verbalize those fears. It goes without saying, or well, it doesn't go without saying, but often in fire halls, it's a very male-dominated profession, and the conversation around mental health or struggles a person is facing occasionally is not talked about. It's kind of this suck it up mentality, and that you're fine, and everyone has an experience like this, and you just have to kind of man up and keep going. And Aaron said that both the counselor he saw through the church and the one provided by Surrey Fire Hall said, you need to talk these things through. Even just to say, I was scared, I had this experience, and I'm scared that I'll have it again, is so helpful in articulating what we're feeling on the inside, that we can ask for help, and that in his return to work, he knew that he was supported, and he knew that he would not likely be in that situation anytime soon, and that when he was able to play a supporting role if he needed to. There was that caveat built in, which I thought was really great in terms of the fire hall, not just like, get back on the horse kind of thing and you'll lead the next call to kind of show that you can do it. It was built in that if he needed to just run the truck or run the hoses or be a first responder on site for any first aid needs to come, he could play that role. What was also interesting was a conversation that he shared with me that he had with his wife, Karen, who also felt very traumatized by the experience. Getting the phone call that there had been an incident at work when your husband is a firefighter is never a good phone call to receive. He explained to me that she had felt a sense of panic, immediately began asking the questions, what happened? Is he okay? Is he alive? And was overcome with fear and then relief to hear that he was okay, but then wanted to know what happened and how could this happen, and that to know, again, just to be reassured that he was okay. And so for her to be able to have access to counselors, and both, again, through their church and through the fire hall, was really important. And he said her ability to gain peace of mind for him to go back to work was a big key in him having peace of mind going back to work. Again, it speaks to the nature of Aaron and people in the profession of firefighters as helpers, often more concerned about the well-being of others than their own. And I fed that back to him. I said, isn't it interesting that one of the things that made you okay to go back to work was that Karen was okay with you going back to work? And he hadn't actually realized that just yet. And so even through our conversation, recognizing that about himself and that kind of natural desire to be a caregiver and look out for others was helpful. I think a helpful revelation for him. But he said knowing that he has her support and that she's okay with him doing the job makes him competent and comfortable to be able to go back and know that even if something like this were to happen again, she wasn't holding it against him or resentful of him having the job. She was fully supportive of his career choice and supported him going back even after this incident. So I also asked Aaron about some of the hard things he sees in terms of being a first responder. Firefighters are often the first ones to respond to car accidents. And he said that he's seen a lot of hard things. And one of the things that keeps him motivated, and to use his words, keeps me sane in the midst of all of the hard crashes that he's been to, is that their job is to always make things better. And he says, I say that to people when we arrive on scene. He says, if people are conscious or injured or whatever, he explains to them that they're there to help. They're there to make the situation better. He says, this is a hard spot you're in, but we're gonna do everything I can to make you better. We're gonna help you as much as we can, and just reassures them. And he says, as he is again reassuring these victims, that it is also keeps him calm, and it reminds him by saying what he's here to do, even if it's a terrible scene. He said, I'm here to help make things better. And that's a reminder as much for the people that he's helping as it is for him, that even though things might not be okay really afterwards, that he's there to do his very best along with his team, his crew, to make the situation better as much as they can. And so in terms of showing up when he knows, they know that it's going to be a bad scene, perhaps there's kids involved, he says, which is always really, really challenging, to know that the situation is better simply because they're there. If there was no fire crew on scene, or if, they couldn't get there as quickly as they can, that the scene would be much worse. So he said that choosing to view things from an optimistic viewpoint, even when the outcome may not be what anyone hopes for, he said helps him to be resilient in his role, and to make sure that every time he goes into work, he's ready for the challenges he faces based on what he knows he's there to do, which is to help people and to make things better. He said that's what keeps him going.